Hi, this is Gloria Heck, and welcome to the July monthly market report for 2022. Today, I'm going to take you through some of the biggest topics in this shifting market. I'm going to start with the topic of economic slowdown. So let's start here from the Wall Street Journal with a new survey from CEOs. There is a recession fear surge among CEOs. They go on to say 3/4 of the global CEOs say that we are in a recession or will be in a recession in the next 12 to 16 months, according to the survey. Remember, there is a widely held definition of a recession, which means 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. Well, we saw negative GDP in the first quarter of the year, and we just ended the second quarter, and the forecasts coming out of the Atlanta Fed are saying we will be having a negative GDP here in the second quarter. So some of the estimates have been very, very low, what they would call anemic growth in this country, 0.3%. The economy is slowing down. Throughout history, during a recessionary period, interest rates go up at the beginning of the recession. But in order to come out of the recession, interest rates are lowered to stimulate the economy moving forward. Historically, we've seen repeated uptick in interest rates followed by lower interest rates. I want to give you a couple graphs that really crystallize this thought of what's happening during recessionary times. If we go back and we look at these prior recessionary periods, this is a graphic going all the way back to the early 70s. And this outlines in blue the graph mark. They're the 30-year fixed interest rate. The boxes highlighted in yellow are recessionary periods. This is what typically interest rates have looked like in a recessionary period. I think it starts to bring things into perspective, and certainly here at the end, the rise in interest rates that we've seen more recently here in the first 6 months of this year. If we break this down and convert it to the table versus this visual chart, in each recession that we've had in this country going back to the early 80s, what has happened to mortgage interest rates. This graph shows you when it actually happened, how long it happened, and what was the starting interest rate, and what did it fall to. There is one thing that every one of these recessions has in common, and it's that in each instance, mortgage rates fell. And there are reasons for that, and I'm going to go back into that in just a minute. Over the past 5 recessions, mortgage rates have fallen an average of 1.8 percentage points from the peak seen during the recession in the trough. And in many cases, they continue to fall after the fact, as it takes some time for things to turn around. Even when the recession is technically over, all the work the Fed is doing right now is to tame inflation. They're raising the Fed fund rate to tame inflation. To do that, they must slow down the economy. And you've heard them talk about trying to engineer a soft landing. We've talked about that before. If you don't engineer the soft landing, then you end in recession. That's highly likely. Going back to that first survey that the CEO said, we're either heading towards a recession or we're in a recession. Because the reason they say we're in one is because it will be identified by what's in the rearview mirror. Remember, I said 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. But if they don't engineer that soft landing, we go into recession. And what does the Fed then do? The impact of housing in this country is tremendous. We've shared the average impact of a new build, an existing home that sells, and the economic impact all across the country. Housing will lead the economy out of the recession, and it has in the past. The U.S. economy will not recover until housing leads the way out. So that's the reason why you see the cyclical events happen when it comes to an economic slowdown. Recession doesn't equal a housing crisis. 4 out of the 6 times we were in a recession, homes appreciated. 2 times they fell, once marginally in the early 90s, and the other time was in 2008. There were a lot of people that were hurt, a lot of people who were impacted, a lot of people who saw family members that were hurt. We're watching economic pressures around us, and people are still wondering, I still want to buy a home. Are there going to be options available for me? It's been such a tight market of inventory over the past couple years, and everyone wants to know what's the latest with inventory. So I'm going to walk you through inventory next. We're going to start with the breakdown of a few key trends that we're seeing on the market, then lead into how that's impacting inventory. So I want to start with what we're seeing on offers received. We're seeing those numbers decline. It peaked around an average of 5.5 offers in April. Then it dropped to 5, and now we're seeing about 4.2 in the latest information. And what that means is that rising mortgage rate environment is really starting to soften demand. Now think about it though. 4.2 offers per home sold is still far above our pre-pandemic norm as far as offers were concerned. We're still in a competitive seller's market, but we're seeing a little bit of that softening. What we're also seeing is that the offers over the asking price are declining. Months ago, 61% of offers were over asking price, and that number has softened now to 55% over asking price on 4 of 9 average homes sold. Now think about that too. That's still more than half of the offers over asking. Certainly a softening or a moderation, but definitely not a huge decline. Now, what we're also seeing right now is that sales are softening as well. We are seeing a slower pace of sales. I'm going to spend some time breaking this down today. I'll show you some visuals and why sales are lowering as well. And with all of these factors in play, what does that mean for inventory? That's really the big question. Inventory is on the rise. It means that there's more options for buyers coming to the market. And I'm also going to walk you through this today. Let's start with a quote from Mark Fleming. It says, "There has been a pickup in the inventory that we've seen recently, but it's not from a big increase in new listings." End quote. So put a pin on that thought because we're going to get back to that. Quote, "But rather a slowdown in the pace of sales. And remember that month supply measures the inventory of sales relative to the pace of sales." End quote. Same inventory, fewer sales means more month supply. Let's see a deeper look at what this means. We know that the month supply of an inventory of homes is increasing. It was at a record low in January of this year at 1.6 months of inventory, and it's ticked up lately at 2.6 months of inventory. Now that's not a huge increase, but it certainly means more options for buyers when there's more inventory on the market. Now remember, a balanced market, however, is 6 months of inventory, and we haven't seen that since 2012. We're nowhere out of the woods on where we need to be with inventory to meet that balanced market, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. So why is that? That's the big question. Well, new monthly listing counts are increasing. That's what you can see from here. On Realtor.com, you'll see the green bars are last year and the blue bars are this year. What two things really pop out at me when I look at this graph? I see the blue bars are higher, more new inventory, more new listings coming to the market this year, and they're ticking up at a faster pace. April to May, those blue bars from this year, that's increasing at a faster pace than we did last year at the same time. That means that there are more new listings coming to the market for buyers and there are more options available. But what's happening at the same time? And this is what you heard in that quote from Mark Fleming, is that the pace of sales is slowing. Let me show you what that looks like. This is the existing home sales, seasonally adjusted annual rate from NAR. What you can see in the green bar over in the right is that we are projected to end the year at 5.4 million home sales by the end of 2022 if we continue at the pace we're selling homes today. Now, we know that the pace has softened because of the rising rates, economic pressures, inflationary pressures, and all the things that are impacting the housing market right now. The pace of sales is slowing. When you compare that to last year and the year before, we have to remember that it's slower because those were absolutely incredible years. They were an anomaly in the housing market. But where we are today in that green bar is returning more towards the direction of those pre-pandemic years, the 2018, 2019, and we have to remember that those were great years in real estate. So here's a quote from Lawrence Yun. Quote, home sales have essentially returned to the levels seen in 2019 prior to the pandemic after 2 years of gangbuster performance, end quote. I think that's very well said, that we certainly had outstanding performance the past 2 years. What this means is that there are more options available, more active inventory on the market. Daniel Hale from Realtor.com says, quote, active inventory continued to grow, rising 21% 1 year ago, end quote. That's huge for buyers, right? In other words, we're starting to add more options, but the market needs even more before home shoppers have a selection that's roughly equivalent to the pre-pandemic housing market. We still have far more buyers than we have sellers. That's continuing to put upward pressure on prices. We know that to be true. Not enough options out there, but certainly more coming to the market. What does this look like for the rest of the year? Well, Realtor.com forecasted for the rest of 2022. This graphic shows you a 2022 forecast update on inventory. And what it shows us is that at the beginning of the year, Realtor.com projected that we would have a 0.3% increase in inventory. So very small. They have now reforecasted for the rest of the year an increase of 15% in inventory. A lot of that largely has to do with the softening or slowing in the pace of sales and that uptick in new listings, more inventory coming to market. They're seeing more in the projections. That's going to create options for buyers. We should start to see less competition, fewer bidding wars, and therefore less upward price pressure. Let's talk about that in a minute. In fact, a simple analysis shows that a 1 month increase in the month supply, which is exactly what we've seen this year, results in 3% decline in the annualized house price growth. Our preliminary house price index is already showing moderation in house prices in April. What we're seeing is with the softening of demand, more new listings, slower pace in sales, more inventory is available. And when there's more inventory available, that tug between buyer demand and supply lessens. That means less pressure on prices. Prices are expected to increase just at a moderate rate compared to the 20% increase that we saw in our market year over year. It was impossible a year ago to find a home. If you stepped out of the market a year ago, think about stepping back in because it's still going to be difficult, but it's certainly not going to be impossible as we have more options available in the market. Now is the time to jump back into the process and really find that home you've been looking for. Many people are asking, should I buy a home now? Many people are wondering, does it make sense? I think this is even bigger than the interest rate question right now. The average mortgage payment has gone up significantly. And that's a barrier to home ownership for so many people. And it causes others to pause And we're certainly seeing that in the market. But more than that, nobody wants to buy anything that's going to be worth less 6 months, 12 months down the road, right? I don't care what you're talking about. You don't want to buy anything that's going to lose value significantly. Maybe there's some things you could argue. Maybe a car you buy, and you kind of understand that. People don't want that in their homes. They want their homes to be an appreciating asset. So let's talk about that. The cooling housing market enters the great deceleration. Home prices decelerate as the housing market downshifts. Buying a home at the wrong time can backfire big time. These are the headlines that are sort of pummeling consumers right now about the housing market. And certainly we are in a decelerating time right now. We will not see the appreciation going forward that we've seen in the past. And that's a good thing, right? We cannot continue to see appreciation like we've seen over the past 24 months. It's absolutely not sustainable. A decelerating environment means there's not as much appreciation as what we've seen in the past. And I'm going to go into what that means from forecasters in just a moment. But the analogy I always love to use on this is, picture this. You've got a road that kind of goes off and sort of you can't see around the corner there. You're not sure exactly what's around the corner, and you can't see around the bend, and maybe there's an officer sitting up there and you're flying down this highway doing well over the speed limit. Maybe you're doing 100 miles an hour or close to it. And you slow down when you see an officer up there, or you're going to get a ticket. So you slow down to around 60 miles per hour. The speed limit is 65, whatever it is. And it feels like you're going a lot slower. That's the analogy I would like to use in this market every time I talk to somebody about what's happening in prices. Because deceleration is very different from depreciation. A price reduction is very different from depreciating home values. We're in a time right now as the market shifts where a lot of people have priced their homes aspirationally. And there are a lot of sellers right now that haven't adjusted to that market. I know I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but when you've priced aspirationally and you're trying to catch the market and you're seeing market shifts, you're going to have to make a price reduction. And the reality is your home was likely overpriced to begin with. Pricing right is critical in today's market. Now let's look at the difference between deceleration and depreciation, because all of the forecasters we see are calling for appreciation. The average of those forecasters is 8.5%. Now I think of this as an important point that we need to focus on. Forecasters are calling for appreciation, but we have to really understand why they're calling for appreciation. I'm going to get into that here in just a couple slides. But when you look across from Fannie, Freddie, CoreLogic, all of these forecasters, the average is 8.5 appreciation. Not what we saw last year, tremendous appreciation, 20% increase. Now these forecasts started the year at about 5%, and they've ratcheted up. They've kind of settled in here right about 8%. If you remember from our past reports, we've called between 8 to 10% appreciation. But you're seeing that moderation through rising interest rates. Price will always be determined by supply and demand. And that's the why that we have to get into. So this is the up-to-date forecast for this year. Next, I want to look at the home price expectation survey. This is 100 economists, housing market experts, those that are in the know about housing across the country. They are surveyed every quarter and asked, what do you see for appreciation this year and the 4 years ahead? And you can see it right here from the home price expectation survey, 9.3% appreciation. This is in line with what we saw from the other forecasters, 8.5%, 8.5%, 9.3%, that's 8 to 9 range, and then 4, 3, 4, as you see in the years going forward. Based on what experts are saying, we're likely to see good appreciation in housing this year. The average going back 3.8% in residential homes across the country, and appreciation in 23, 24, 25, looking at more normal appreciation. There's been a video circulating around from Dave Ramsey where he talks about the number of people in the market and why homes aren't going to lose value. And that's very compelling. It's been shared by a lot of people. Maybe you've seen it. If you haven't, you can look at it, you can look it up. But I pulled a quote out of that video, and he says this: when interest rates go up, guess what? Fewer buyers. Exactly what we're seeing right now. The demand goes down. Thus, prices are going to soften or not be cray-cray, his words there, as they have been. And that's a good thing. And that's what we're seeing right now. I want to give you two graphics that I think do a tremendous job of visually conveying why experts are calling for home price appreciation. When many think, gosh, this doesn't sound good. The economy is slowing down. We've seen tremendous appreciation the last couple of years. We can't sustain this. So let's break this down. What he says, quote, the root issue that always drives house prices is supply and demand, end quote. So let's cover supply. Everything in the blue there. Every year, the number of single-family housing units are brought to market is pre-2008. Everything before the housing crisis. In the bar there, the average annual units completed reference the 50-year average on the number of homes brought to the market. For the past 14 years, the gray bar is right there. We have been below the 50-year average in the number of builds brought to market. 2008, our business is at the center. Builders are at the center of that, and they get wiped out. They've had to go find something else to do to feed their families. They had to figure out some other vocation. In a lot of cases, they got out of the business. And oh, by the way, the demand just wasn't there, and we haven't been bringing those units to market. We know we're undersupplied now. There have been millions of homes thrown out there of how much we're short in this country, and there's a lot. There's a big topic. But this graphic will give people sort of a picture of what that actually looks like. This year, builders are bringing units to market, and we will surpass the 50-year average. They're trying to bring this back, but they can't do it overnight. That's what's in the rear view mirror. That is the supply side, what's driving demand. And this is the graphic that helps to communicate demand. The demand side is driven by the size of the millennials that are moving through the market. Isolated here in blue, the millennial generation is the largest generation behind the baby boomers, just a little bit behind in sheer size of the generation. But they're moving through the peak home buying years. And this graphic right here, this little box, the peak home buying years, according to NAR, in their recent buyer survey, 81% of the first-time home buyers fall in this category, in this age range. 43% of all buyers fit in this category. There is a tremendous demand and a tremendous volume coming from those that want to buy, driven by the millennial generation. Let's go back to review. We have these two graphics. We have the one here that shows we have a lack of supply that's been coming to the market for the last 14 years. Now, builders are trying to do that, and we have tremendous demand right here with millennials and people that are moving through their peak home buying years. This sort of gives a word picture of what Dave Ramsey said in that video. And I think all of that leads up to this last slide here. Experts don't believe the market is in a bubble or a crash is in the cards like during the Great Recession. It's way different from 2008. The nation is still suffering from a housing shortage that has reached crisis proportions at a time when many millennials are reaching the age when they consider home ownership absolutely true, and that is keeping upward pressure prices. I hope this knowledge will help you to make the best decisions for yourself. I'm not saying that we're not in a difficult market or that there's not going to be challenges, because there will be. But I'll say this, there are a lot of people in the last couple of years that found it impossible to go out and buy a house. They dropped out of the process because they either couldn't win out on a bid, multiple offer scenarios, all those things that we saw happening. And they just said, you know what? We're not going to do it. And they felt like the dream of home ownership was out of reach. It certainly costs more right now. It is more difficult, but it's not impossible. We're seeing inventory come back in the market. Now there are more options. Thank you for watching my July monthly market report. I hope that you will subscribe to the channel and reach out to me if you have any questions about real estate in Southeast Florida.